This past June, a woman named Althea Bernstein claimed that she was set on fire by 4 white men while waiting at a stoplight in the middle of downtown Madison, Wisconsin at 1 a.m. She said the assailants, who happened to be standing in the middle of the street with all of the necessary materials for whatever reason, doused her with lighter fluid and then threw a lighter into the car. You know, like they do in the movies where they throw a lighter and then something lights on fire. It doesn't really work with most lighters in real life, but that's what she said, and it set her face on fire. Somehow she was left only with a few splotchy burns on one side of her face after her face being on fire. One would expect a bit more visible damage from having her whole face set ablaze. One would also expect that 4 flame-throwing murderous white guys attempting to burn people alive in the middle of the city would attract the attention of at least a few witnesses, not to mention security cameras, but the alleged men and the alleged attack was witnessed by no one, and no evidence of the assailants appeared on any camera anywhere in the city. There was also no trace of burn marks or accelerant in the vehicle she was driving when she was supposedly set on fire. So police investigated the hate crime claim and eventually closed the case because they could not find a single shred of evidence to substantiate it. Althea's attackers vanished into the night, much like Jussie Smollett's attackers and the terrorists who hung a rope in Bubba Wallace's garage. It's almost as though they never existed at all. But despite the fact that this event, as reported by Bernstein, was almost certainly a hoax and had all the hallmarks of a hoax from the very beginning, still it made headlines. And as you'd expect, the races of the victim and her probably imaginary attackers were front and center in the headlines. The headlines only disappeared once it became clear that the story was turning into an embarrassment for those who hyped it up to begin with. Now, I bring this case up now, again, because it provides an interesting contrast. Consider now the case of Stephen Ammenhauser, 53 years old, mentally ill, now dead after being brutally murdered last week. 2 black teenagers, Xavion Perry and Adriel Riley Jr., ages 16 and 14, have been charged with entering his home and setting him on fire. According to police, they watched him burn for a little bit before leaving. The victim was eventually found, transported to a hospital where he succumbed to his burns after a couple of days. He suffered what is quite literally the most painful death possible. No motive has been given for the crime, and there's no indication that hate crime charges are even being considered at this point. Which doesn't mean that there's no evidence that it was a hate crime. It just means that they're not considering right now calling it that. I ask you, have you heard about this case? I mean, heard about it somewhere besides from me right now or one of the other hosts or our website? And if you did hear about it, did you hear about the races of the people involved? Almost certainly not. A search on Google turns up a few articles about this crime, which it's not like this happened 10 years ago. It happened just last week. But nothing in any mainstream outlet mentioning the racial dichotomy. Is that because the media has decided that race is now irrelevant in violent crime? Well, we know that's certainly not the case. All we have to do is look at the other tragic event of the past week, which happened when a man walked into massage parlors in Atlanta and murdered 8 people. The killer is white. 6 of the victims were Asian. 2 were white. Now here, it would be hard to find headlines that don't mention the races of those involved and expressly draw a connection between race and the crime. We're told that this is the result of white supremacy, that the killer was a white supremacist, one of many, out to kill Asians. The only problem is that there is no evidence of that. Here's a police spokesman yesterday telling us what they know about the motive at this point. Listen.
The suspect did take responsibility for the shootings. He said that early on once we began the interviews with him. He claims that these, and as the chief said, this is still early, but he does claim that it was not racially motivated. He apparently has an issue, what he considers a sex addiction, and sees these locations as something that allows him to go to these places, and it's a temptation for him that he wanted to eliminate. Like I said, it's still early on, but those were comments that he made.
Did he discuss any kind of religious motivation for this, or was he responsible?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of.
Or political?
Non-political. I've heard nothing about politics.
Well, that's what he says. Now, typically, the person who commits the act is a pretty good authority on what their motivation was. Also, typically, if someone is, and we know this from past events, mass killings and so on, attacks that are racially or ethnically motivated, oftentimes the person who does it for those reasons is happy to tell you that that was the reason. So by all accounts, it sounds like this was a lunatic motivated by sexual rage and jealousy. Could still turn out that there was more to it than that, but that's what we know right now. That would explain why he killed both Asian and white women. The disappointment from the left to the news that this was not racially motivated, as far as we know, has been palpable. For many of them, from what it seems, the tragedy is not that humans died, but that the crime isn't useful to their narrative. I mean, the media is downright excited by, happy about violent crime committed by white men. I mean, they are happy about it. They like it. They can barely contain their glee. In their minds, humans are not anything but props anyway. They have no value. None of us have value to the media outside of our political usefulness. And that's why there was a mad rush to declare this crime not only racially motivated, but part of a trend, an epidemic, a pandemic of whiteness, as the website The Root put it. Sure, the facts don't fit with this narrative, but so what? Facts can be manipulated, ignored, invented, lied about, as we have seen. As for the real facts, it must be noted that yes, there has been a rise in violent crime against Asians. But much of that has come at the hands of non-white people. You know, a lot of violence against Asians is committed by black men. It's just a fact. Anti-Asian sentiment has been a problem in the black community for a long time. And you don't have to take my word for it. It's not just me telling you that. The left-wing media admits this. But of course, they put the blame elsewhere. So take this headline from Vox on Tuesday, echoing a common talking point that you see all over social media and the media right now. Their headline is, "The history of tensions and solidarity between black and Asian American communities explained." And then the subtitle, "How White Supremacy Tried to Divide Black and Asian Americans and How Communities Work to Find Common Ground." Okay, so acknowledging these tensions, but these tensions between the two non-white groups of people are the fault of, you guessed it, white people, of course. Well, that's easy to determine when everything is the fault of white people. You know, I wonder if this is the fault of white people too. In February, an Asian woman in Milwaukee was tortured, raped, beaten, and killed in a park in broad daylight. She was apparently hanging out in the park, laying on a blanket in the park. And next thing you know, she's being taken, tortured, raped, and beaten. 2 black teenagers were arrested for that crime. Now, there's another story that you probably didn't hear about, and if you did hear about it, most likely not what the race is highlighted or mentioned at all. Liz Plank, an MSNBC contributor, tweeted in response to the massage parlor killings. She said, "White masculinity fetishizes and dehumanizes Asian women, and it is intrinsically tied to racism. It's crucial that we don't erase the way that misogyny and racism operate together to justify killing Asian women." Now, I haven't checked, admittedly, but I feel rather certain, and I will eat my words if I'm wrong, I feel rather certain that she never said anything about black masculinity dehumanizing and fetishizing Asian women in response to the rape and murder of Miss Lee in Milwaukee. You know, the media has its villains and also its good guys. Every story is already written. It's only a matter of making reality fit into the boxes that they have set up for it. Whatever can't be fit is simply discarded or denied. As they say, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, when you're the American media, everything looks like white supremacy. And whatever doesn't look like it, doesn't exist. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.